The weed you hate most, the one you spray, dig, curse at, and spend real money every spring trying to kill, the coarse, sprawling grass that takes over your lawn every July and refuses to die, is a domesticated cereal grain, a crop, one that human beings deliberately planted, harvested, threshed, and ate for thousands of years on 2 separate continents and in parts of the world, still do today. You have been poisoning a food crop in your own yard, and you spent money to do it. This is crabgrass. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what it really is, the 2 extraordinary histories behind it that almost nobody in this country has heard, how people actually harvested and ate it, and the honest, unglamorous reason this knowledge disappeared from our world. Because it isn't the reason the internet will tell you. I'll also show you the one thing you must check before you ever eat a single seed of it, because that part genuinely matters. But let me start with the honest correction, because I promised you the truth, and I'm not going to open with a lie. Crabgrass is not literally wheat. It isn't a variety of wheat, and it isn't a wheat ancestor. What it actually is, in my opinion, is far more interesting than that, because while wheat was busy becoming the most famous crop on earth, this humble grass was quietly feeding people in places where wheat simply could not grow. It's a cereal grain in its own right, from its own ancient lineage, domesticated by its own farmers, thousands of years ago. It just never got the marketing. So let me take you back and show you what's actually growing in your lawn. Crabgrass belongs to a group of grasses called Digitaria, a name that comes from the Latin word for finger, because when this grass goes to seed, it throws up those distinctive seed heads that split into finger-like spikes radiating from a single point, like a hand held open. You've seen them 1,000 times. You've probably mowed them down this week. And every one of those little fingers is packed with tiny grains. Now here's the first history, and it's the one that should genuinely change how you see this plant. In West Africa, there's a crop called fonio. It is one of the oldest cultivated cereals on the entire African continent, grown for thousands of years across the savannas, and still grown today across a wide belt of West Africa, where it feeds millions of people. It is used to make porridge, couscous, flatbreads, and beer. It's woven deep into culture and tradition, treated in some communities as an honored food for celebrations and important occasions. And fonio is a digitaria. It is a domesticated crabgrass. Sit with that for a moment. The genus you're fighting in your yard contains a grain that has fed a huge part of a continent for millennia. And fonio isn't just old, it's genuinely impressive as a crop. It grows on poor, sandy, exhausted soil where more demanding cereals fail. It handles drought and heat that would flatten other grains. And it is famously fast. Some varieties go from seed to harvest in only 6 to 8 weeks, which is why it's traditionally called a hungry season crop. The grain that comes in first, when last year's stores have run out and nothing else is ready. In hard country, in hard years, that speed was the difference between eating and not eating. And fonio is having a genuine moment right now. Chefs and food scientists have taken a fresh interest in it, precisely because of those qualities. A nutritious grain that shrugs off drought and poor soil looks a lot more valuable in a warming world than it did 50 years ago. It's being written about as a crop with a real future, not just a past, which is a strange thing to hold in your head while you look down at your lawn and realize the same family of plant is sitting there, thriving in your worst soil, asking nothing of you, and being sprayed for its trouble. Now here's the second history, and this is the one that hits closer to home for most of you watching, because crabgrass wasn't only a crop in Africa, it was a crop in Europe. The species that plagues American lawns most, the coarse, hairy, sprawling one, was deliberately cultivated across Central and Eastern Europe as a grain. In Poland, Germany, Bohemia, and neighboring regions, farmers grew it, harvested it, and hulled it into a fine cereal, and it was eaten as a porridge or groat. It was known by names that translate roughly to manna groats, and it was often called Polish millet. This was not a famine food scraped up in desperation. It was a recognized crop with an established name, sold in markets, cooked in ordinary kitchens, and it survived in cultivation right up into the 1800s, which, in the span of human history, is practically yesterday. Your great-great-grandparents' generation could very plausibly have eaten a bowl of this, and it makes complete sense once you understand how people actually farmed. Before industrial agriculture, a household didn't bet everything on one crop. You grew several because weather is cruel and one failure could ruin you. So the small, tough, quick grains, the ones that would grow on thin soil in a dry year, on ground that wasn't worth much, earned their place in the rotation precisely because they were reliable when the grand crops failed. Nobody grew this because it was glamorous. They grew it because it never let them down. And it gets better because there's a strong historical thread that crabgrass didn't sneak into North America as a stowaway at all. In the 1800s, agricultural authorities were actively hunting the world for useful crops to introduce, and crabgrass was among the plants brought over and promoted for exactly that purpose, as a grain and forage crop for livestock and people. In other words, it's quite likely that this plant was deliberately imported and encouraged as something useful. It did what it was asked to do. It grew everywhere, magnificently. And then, within a century, we changed our minds about what a yard was for and declared war on it. Because that's the part of the story that really matters. What changed was not the plant. What changed was us. Let me talk about the nutrition, because people always ask. As grains go, this family holds up remarkably well. Fonio is prized for being nutritionally rich, and it's particularly noted for containing amino acids that are often in short supply in other cereals, the building blocks your body needs and cannot make on its own. It's naturally gluten-free, which is why you'll increasingly find Fonio sold in specialty health food shops in the West at a premium price, marketed as an ancient supergrain. And here is the delicious irony of this entire video. People are paying good money for a bag of imported digitaria at the health food store, while spraying its cousin off their lawn with a product they also paid for. 2 purchases, same genus, opposite directions. So why did this knowledge disappear? Why did a crop that fed Europe and still feeds West Africa become, in our part of the world, the single most hated plant in suburbia? And here, I'm not going to sell you a conspiracy, because the honest answer is more damning than a conspiracy. It's just economics, and it's what actually happened. First, yield. The tiny grains of crabgrass are exactly that, tiny. They're fiddly to gather, and traditionally they were hulled and processed by hand, which is slow, patient work. Wheat and other big cereals give you far more food for far less labor. And once mechanized farming arrived, crops that couldn't be run through a machine were finished. A grain that resists efficient harvesting doesn't survive an industrial food system, no matter how nourishing it is or how badly you need it in a hard year. Crabgrass wasn't outlawed. It was simply outcompeted on paper and dropped. Second, and this one is the real killer, the lawn happened. In the 20th century, the manicured uniform green carpet became a status symbol across America, and a whole industry grew up around achieving it. Crabgrass, being a coarse, sprawling, differently textured grass, ruined that uniform look, so it was reclassified. Not as food, not even as a harmless plant, but as an enemy. Products were formulated and marketed specifically to kill it. It became the villain in the advertisements, and an entire generation of homeowners was taught, in complete sincerity, that this plant was a problem to be eliminated at any cost. Follow the money on that for a second, and it isn't complicated. There's no business in telling you a free grain grows in your yard. There's a very large business in selling you something to kill it every single spring, forever. Nobody had to bury the knowledge with a shovel. They just had to sell a different story loudly enough, for long enough, until the old one was forgotten. And it worked. Ask 100 people on your street what crabgrass is, and 100 of them will say weed. Not one will say grain. Notice how complete that reversal is. We took a plant that people once deliberately sowed, tended, harvested, hulled, and served to their children, and within a couple of generations, we turned it into the thing a neighbor judges you for. The same plant, the same seeds. The only thing that changed was the story we were told about it, and the story we were told came from people with something to sell. That's worth remembering the next time you're standing in a garden aisle in April, reading a label, about to spend money on a bag of powder to kill a cereal crop that showed up in your yard for free. All right, now let me show you how to actually identify it, and then the part you absolutely cannot skip. Crabgrass grows low and sprawling, spreading outward from a central point in a rough star or hand shape, with stems that push out flat along the ground and can root where the joints touch the soil. The leaves are wider and coarser than typical lawn grass, and a bright, slightly yellowish green that stands out against fine turf. In midsummer, it sends up its seed heads, and those are unmistakable once you know them. Several finger-like spikes radiating out from a single point at the top of the stem, like an open hand. Run your fingers up one of those spikes when it's ripe, and you'll strip off dozens of tiny seeds. The most common lawn species is noticeably hairy on its lower leaf sheaths. Another is smoother. Both are digitaria. Now the part that genuinely matters, and I want you to take this seriously. First, and most important of all, do not harvest this from a treated lawn. This is the one that catches people. Crabgrass grows in exactly the places most likely to have been sprayed. Lawns treated with weed killers, feed and weed products, and pesticides, often the very products bought specifically to kill this plant. It also grows along roadsides, where it collects vehicle grime and runoff, in the areas where dogs do their business. So harvest only from ground you know has not been treated, well back from the road, and away from where animals go. If you cannot vouch for the history of that patch of ground, don't eat what grows in it. Second, and this applies to every wild grass seed on earth, not just this one, inspect the seed heads for ergot. Ergot is a fungus that infects grasses and replaces individual grains with hard, dark purple to black bodies that look distinctly wrong, swollen, discolored, sticking out where normal seed should be. Ergot is genuinely toxic and has caused mass poisonings historically, and it is the single reason wild grain gathering demands attention. So look closely at your seed heads before you gather. If you see any of those dark, hardened, misshapen bodies among the seeds, don't try to pick them out. Discard the entire harvest and move to a different patch. Clean seed only, no exceptions. And third, be certain of what you have. Grasses are a huge family, and while crabgrass is distinctive once you know it, close enough isn't a standard I want you working to when you're going to grind something into flour. Learn those finger-like seed heads properly. When in doubt, leave it out. With all of that settled, here's how it's actually done. You harvest in late summer into fall, when the seed heads have matured and the grains have turned from green to tan or brown, and start coming loose when you run your hand up the spike. Choose a dry day. Then it's simple, if not fast. Hold a bag or a basket underneath and strip the seed heads by running them through your closed hand, letting the grain fall in. You can also cut whole seed heads and dry them on a sheet, then rub them out. What you'll have is a mix of grain, chaff, and bits of stem, and now comes the part our ancestors did without complaint. You winnow it. Pour it slowly from one container to another in front of a fan or in a light breeze, and the light chaff blows away while the heavier grain drops. Repeat until it's reasonably clean. Then, if you want it truly fine, the grain needs hulling, which traditionally meant pounding it gently in a mortar to loosen the husks, then winnowing again. This is genuinely the tedious part, and it's exactly why the crop lost out to wheat. Then you eat it. The simplest way, and the traditional way across much of its range, is porridge. Simmer the cleaned grain in water like any small cereal until soft, and eat it with whatever you'd normally add. You can toast it first for a nuttier flavor. You can grind it into a coarse flour and mix it into breads and flatbreads. Fonio is famously cooked much like couscous, fluffed up and served alongside stews. It's a mild, pleasant, slightly nutty, small grain. Nothing exotic, nothing challenging, just food. Now let me give you the honest limits, because I would rather you trust me than come back disappointed. This will not fill your pantry. The grains are small, the yield from a patch is modest, and the processing takes real time and patience for a fairly humble bowl of porridge. Anyone who tells you that you can feed your family off your lawn this summer is selling you something. What this genuinely is, a real, edible, historic grain, a fascinating skill worth having, and a piece of knowledge our ancestors would have considered basic. It also happens to be one of the most quietly satisfying things you'll ever do in your own yard. It is not a substitute for your grocery store, and I won't pretend otherwise. Let me tell you what got me into this. I had a corner of my yard I'd fought for years. Thin soil, half sun, and every summer it filled up with crabgrass no matter what I did. I'd bought the products. I'd read the labels. I'd lost, repeatedly. Then I came across a mention of Polish millet in an old agricultural text and went digging. And the more I read, the more absurd my own behavior looked. So one September, instead of spraying it, I went out and stripped the seed heads by hand into a paper bag. It took about half an hour to fill it. I winnowed it in front of a box fan on the porch, feeling faintly ridiculous, and I ended up with a modest bowl of small tan grain. I simmered it into a porridge, and it was, honestly, fine. Mild, nutty, entirely edible. Nothing about it was miraculous, and that was exactly the point. A perfectly ordinary food from a plant I had spent years and real money trying to destroy. Let me answer the questions I know are coming. Is crabgrass really edible? Yes. The seeds have been eaten as a grain for thousands of years in Africa as fonio and in Europe as a cultivated cereal, and the young leaves have been used as fodder. Is it actually wheat? No, and I said so up front. It's a cereal grain from a different lineage entirely, and honestly a more remarkable one. Can I eat it from my own lawn? Only if that lawn hasn't been treated with weed killer, fertilizer, or pesticide, and isn't next to a road or a place pets use. This is the rule that matters most. What about the ergot you mentioned? Inspect every seed head, and if you see dark, hardened, swollen bodies where seeds should be, discard the whole lot and pick elsewhere. Do I have to hull it? For a rustic porridge, you can get away with less processing, but for a fine flour, yes, pound and winnow, and expect it to take time. Can I just buy fonio instead? Absolutely, and it's a lovely grain, widely available now in specialty shops. Just enjoy the irony while you cook it, and can I deliberately grow it? You can, and the plant will make it easy for you, which is more than you can say for most crops. So here's the whole of it. The weed you have been fighting is a domesticated cereal grain from a genus that includes one of the oldest cultivated crops in Africa, and that was itself grown and eaten across Europe within recent historical memory. It was never buried by a conspiracy. It was simply out-yielded by bigger grains, made obsolete by machines, and then rebranded as an enemy by an industry that profits every spring from your annual war against it. Harvest it only from clean, untreated ground, check your seed heads carefully, strip the grain in late summer, winnow it, and cook it like any small cereal. And you'll have eaten the same food that fed people on 2 continents for thousands of years from a plant you were taught to poison. So tell me down in the comments, is crabgrass growing in your yard right now, and had you any idea what it was? And be honest, how much money have you spent trying to kill it? I read every single one. Next time, I'm going to show you another plant almost everybody in this country treats as a nuisance that was once a staple grain of North America, harvested by the boatload, free, abundant, and almost completely forgotten. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And remember, the people who came before us, who fed themselves from the land they stood on, knew a great many things we would do well to remember.